My name is Natalie Williams, and I am 28 years old. As I navigated the familiar roads leading to my childhood home, I felt a distinct dampness in my palms against the steering wheel. It had been 5 years since my last visit, and now I returned bearing the insignia of a colonel discreetly tucked within my luggage. Throughout my military career, my family had regarded my accomplishments with indifference, treating them as though they carried little significance. What they could not possibly anticipate was that, at my father's corporate gathering tomorrow, everything would change. I pulled into the driveway, inhaled deeply to steady myself, and stepped out. Before I proceed, I would love to know where you're watching from. Kindly share your location in the comments, and consider liking and subscribing. For anyone who has ever been undervalued by those closest to them, this story will serve as a powerful reminder of how satisfying redemption can be. The moment I stepped through the front door, I was struck by how little had changed. Faded family portraits still adorned the walls. The same well-worn furniture filled the living room, and the air still held the subtle but unmistakable weight of unspoken judgment. Growing up in a small town in Montana, my past had been carefully preserved, right down to the dated curtains my mother, Diana, had long refused to replace. "Natalie, you're here," she called from the kitchen, making no move to greet me. Her voice carried the same restrained disappointment I had grown accustomed to, especially when addressing me rather than my brother Gregory. I set down my bag and slowly walked through the house, my fingers brushing across familiar surfaces steeped in memory. My father, Albert, had dedicated over 3 decades of service to Pinnacle Defense Systems, rising from an engineer to a senior executive through perseverance and strategic connections. Our family had long revolved around his career and the legacy it paved for Gregory to follow. "Your brother should arrive shortly," my mother informed me when I entered the kitchen. "He was just promoted again to senior project manager." Her pride was unmistakable, the kind she had never once extended toward my achievements. "That's wonderful," I replied, my tone even, honed through years of practice. "I'll be sure to congratulate him." She continued cooking, speaking at length about Gregory and his wife, Megan, their new home, and their many accolades in the corporate world. They were the family's pride and joy, their accomplishments often held up as examples of what I should have become. Not once did she inquire about my own life or career. Excusing myself, I made my way upstairs to my former bedroom. Like the rest of the house, it was frozen in time, adorned with high school cheerleading trophies, academic certificates, and college acceptance letters. Everything from before I made the unfortunate decision to join ROTC had been carefully preserved. Noticeably absent were any acknowledgments of my military service. There were no photographs from my commissioning ceremony, no framed commendations or shadow boxes celebrating my rank, and no newspaper articles recognizing my deployments or promotions. In my parents' eyes, the moment I chose a military path over a business career, I had squandered my potential. Seated on my childhood bed, I gently ran a hand over the old quilt and recalled the night I announced my ROTC scholarship. My father had looked at me with such disappointment that I nearly withdrew my decision. "The military is for people without prospects, Natalie," he had said. "You're capable of more." They had long been preparing Gregory to inherit my father's corporate legacy. He embraced the role wholeheartedly, bolstered by favoritism, and always eager to remind me of how much further ahead he was. Opening my suitcase, I carefully removed the garment bag containing my formal uniform. The following day, Pinnacle Defense Systems would host its annual leadership conference, and my father had casually mentioned the anticipated arrival of the company's CEO, Shannon Murphy. What they did not know, however, was that I had recently been appointed as the military liaison overseeing the $1.2 billion defense contract between the U.S. Army and Pinnacle, a position earned through years of steadfast service and subject matter expertise. My fingers brushed the silver eagle insignia pinned to my dress uniform, symbolizing the rank of colonel. I had achieved this rank more quickly than almost anyone in my division. At 28, I was one of the youngest colonels in the modern Army, specializing in cybersecurity defense systems, the very domain Pinnacle was now contracted to support. I hung my uniform in the closet, concealing it behind forgotten clothes. Tonight, I would endure yet another evening filled with dismissiveness and condescension. But tomorrow would be a turning point. The doorbell echoed through the house, signaling Gregory's arrival. I drew a slow breath, straightened my posture like a soldier preparing for battle, and descended the stairs to face my family. The dining room felt smaller than I remembered, more constricted by the strong personalities gathered around the table. Gregory and Megan had arrived, both dressed in refined, business casual attire that silently declared success. My cousin Tiffany was also present, a predictable inclusion. As a finance director at a prestigious bank, she too was often cited as a model of achievement I had failed to emulate. "Natalie, you remember Tiffany?" my mother asked, as though we hadn't spent childhood holidays side by side. She recently closed a multi-million-dollar deal for her firm. "Hello, Tiffany," I said with a sincere smile. Unlike my immediate family, she had always treated me with genuine warmth, even if she did not entirely understand the path I had taken. "It's really good to see you, Nat," she responded, giving me a brief, affectionate hug. "It's been far too long." The conversation remained cordial as we served ourselves from the meal my mother had prepared. My father sat at the head of the table, periodically glancing at his phone for work emails despite my mother's subtle frowns of disapproval. "So, Dad," Gregory began, predictably steering the conversation toward himself, "I wanted to share an update on the new project I'm leading. Shannon personally selected me to head the team." My father's face lit up with pride. "That's my son. Shannon Murphy doesn't delegate critical responsibilities lightly. You must have left quite an impression." Gregory smirked, casting a glance in my direction to ensure I was listening. "It's the same project I believe you've been involved with for years. Shannon thinks my fresh perspective might help accelerate progress." I held my tongue. He had no idea that the project in question was the Army contract now under my direct oversight. If only they knew how much influence I actually held over the outcome of Gregory's new assignment. My mother, Diana, chimed in swiftly, eager to reinforce Gregory's achievements. "Tell them about the team you're managing now, dear." Gregory straightened with pride. 12 direct reports, including 2 senior engineers who've been with the company over 2 decades. They weren't thrilled about reporting to someone younger at first, but they came around once they saw the results I delivered. "That's marvelous," my mother cooed, then turned to me with a faint, polite smile. "And how is your job going, Natalie? Are you still at the same rank?" The choice of the word job, rather than career, was deliberate, and I noticed. "It's going well," I replied evenly, withholding any mention of my recent promotion. "Still a captain, or something like that?" my father asked vaguely, betraying his lack of understanding or interest in military rank structure. "Something along those lines," I said, redirecting my attention to my plate to avoid further elaboration. "You know," my mother added, "Tiffany recently purchased a stunning condo downtown. 3 bedrooms, panoramic mountain views." Tiffany shifted uncomfortably at being used as a comparison, as she often was. "It's really not that big a deal," she said humbly. "Just fortunate timing in the market. Still," my mother continued, "it's admirable to see young people establishing themselves properly, investing in equity, putting down roots. Unlike all this moving around." Her gaze landed squarely on me. The veiled criticism of my mobile military life was unmistakable. I had lived in 4 states and 2 countries in the past 8 years, a lifestyle my mother considered ungrounded and by her standards immature. Speaking of tomorrow, my father interjected, changing the topic. "Thankfully, the CEO is scheduled to visit our branch. It's quite significant. Shannon Murphy rarely visits regional offices." "I've got my presentation ready," Gregory said, with the flair of someone expecting applause. She even emailed me personally to say she's excited to hear my innovation pitch. "Are there any special events planned for the day?" I asked, feigning curiosity. My father nodded. "We're holding a full staff briefing, departmental overviews, and a formal announcement regarding the military contract. Someone from the Pentagon is attending. A colonel, apparently, but I doubt they'd send someone that high-ranking. Probably just a major who'll be suitably impressed by what we've done." I suppressed a smile. "Sounds like an important day." "Not really," Gregory scoffed. "Military people rarely grasp the complexities of corporate work. They just follow orders and tick boxes." "Gregory," Tiffany admonished, clearly uncomfortable, "that's an unfair generalization." But Gregory wasn't finished. "Let's be honest. The military is a fallback. People go into it when they don't have better options. It's a system for people who'd rather be told what to do than compete in the real world. My mother nodded sympathetically. We always knew you were bright, Natalie. That's why it was such a disappointment when you chose that path. And what do you believe I do in the Army? I asked, carefully controlling my tone. Protocols, paperwork, my father replied with a shrug. Necessary things, sure, but hardly demanding for someone with your potential. You'll never go far in that environment. 10 years from now, Gregory chuckled, you'll still be taking orders, and I'll be running an entire division. Despite all I had accomplished, his words still stung. Therapy had helped me understand that I didn't need their validation, but that didn't mean it no longer hurt. I think Natalie made a choice that suits her, Tiffany offered, attempting to mediate. A waste, really, my mother said with a sigh. You could have run your own company by now. Remember how all your teachers said you were destined for leadership? I remained silent, pushing food around on my plate as they continued dissecting my supposed failures. The conversation moved on to Gregory's upcoming vacation in Hawaii, Megan's recent promotion at her law firm, and Tiffany's growing investment portfolio. No one thought to ask about my recent deployment or the advanced military training I had just completed. As dessert was served, my father returned to the topic of the next day's meeting. 28 years I've given Pinnacle. If this contract lands, it could finally secure me a vice presidency. I nodded politely, all the while knowing that tomorrow's events would unfold very differently than he anticipated. That night, I retreated to my old bedroom. As the house quieted, I could still hear my parents' voices down the hall, praising Gregory's brilliance. He really is something special, my mother said. Shannon would be remiss not to recognize his leadership potential. Lying in bed, I reached for the silver eagle insignia tucked discreetly in my bag, my fingers brushing its cool metal surface. Tomorrow could not come soon enough. I stared up at the glow-in-the-dark stars still clinging to my ceiling, remnants of a time when my future was measured by dreams, not comparisons. Back then, before Gregory stepped into Pinnacle, before I chose ROTC, my parents had believed in me. That belief ended the moment I strayed from the path they had imagined. I remembered vividly sitting at the same table during my sophomore year, ROTC brochure in hand, explaining how the program would cover my education and offer a career of purpose. They had never forgiven me for choosing it. I could feel every eye in the room shift as Shannon Murphy, the highest-ranking executive in the building, stood before me, not Gregory, not my father, and addressed me with familiarity and respect. My father's mouth opened slightly, but no words emerged. Gregory, visibly unsettled, looked between us, clearly struggling to reconcile the narrative he had believed with the reality unfolding before him. Ladies and gentlemen, Shannon said, turning to the assembled team, before we begin, I want to acknowledge the presence of Colonel Natalie Williams, our official liaison with the Department of Defense for Project Aegis. A quiet murmur swept through the room. For those of you who have not been involved in the earlier stages, Colonel Williams has been instrumental in shaping the technical and strategic framework behind the contract we're here to finalize. She brings a unique understanding of both the military's cybersecurity needs and our operational capabilities. She turned back to me. Colonel, I hope you'll be willing to open today's meeting with a few remarks? Of course, I replied, my voice steady. It would be my honor. As Shannon took her seat beside me, directly across from my father and brother, I rose, calmly gathering my notes. I looked out at the faces in the room, many of whom had known my father for decades. Now they waited for me, the daughter he once called misguided, to lead. Good morning, I began, projecting my voice with practiced command. As Ms. Murphy mentioned, I am Colonel Natalie Williams, the Department of Defense's appointed liaison for Project Aegis. Over the past 18 months, I've worked closely with the Pentagon's Joint Cyber Command to assess and approve defense sector technologies that meet the increasingly complex needs of our global security environment. A few heads nodded. Several executives took notes. My father looked stunned. This project represents more than just a contract. It is a cornerstone of the Army's next-generation digital defense platform. As liaison, I have final authorization on deliverables, specifications, security compliance, and most critically, personnel oversight. That last line landed heavily. I didn't need to elaborate further. The implication was crystal clear. I would be evaluating Gregory's leadership and my father's oversight. I look forward to working with many of you throughout the execution phase. Thank you for your time and for your dedication to a project of national importance. I returned to my seat as quiet applause filled the room. Shannon leaned slightly toward me and whispered, "Well delivered." I simply nodded, eyes ahead, allowing the reality of the moment to sink in for them more than me. For years, I had been the daughter who took a different path. Now, I was the one holding the pen that would sign off on the very future they were building. Gregory sat rigid in his seat, no longer flipping through his proposal notes. My father stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable. The meeting continued, but the room had shifted, so had the balance of power, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need their validation. I already had everything I came for: respect, authority, and the knowledge that I had never needed to follow someone else's plan to be extraordinary. "Yes," I said evenly, meeting Shannon's gaze. "Albert is my father." There was a long, telling pause. The silence in the room was no longer awkward but revealing. A subtle shift had taken place. What had once been private family hierarchy now stood exposed under the bright lights of corporate recognition and rank. And for the first time, the unspoken dynamic had reversed. Shannon's eyebrows lifted slightly, though she recovered with effortless grace. "Well," she said with a slight smile, "I imagine this has been quite a day for the Williams family." She turned to the others. "Let's give Colonel Williams a few minutes. I'm sure she has some personal matters to attend to." One by one, the remaining executives offered polite nods and exited the room. Thomas Bailey gave me a respectful handshake as he left. "You've set a new standard today, Colonel." "Thank you," I replied. The conference room doors closed behind them with a muted finality. Now, only my father, Gregory, and I remained. A stillness settled over us, thick with everything that had been said, and more with everything that had never been said. Gregory looked at me first, clearly uncertain whether to speak. But for once, he chose silence. My father stepped forward, his hands clasped in front of him, his brow furrowed deeply, not with disapproval this time, but with something far more unfamiliar. "Natalie," he began, then stopped. The practiced authority in his voice was gone. I had no idea. I studied him for a moment. The man who once told me the military was for people with no ambition. The man who had celebrated my brother's every promotion while failing to attend my commissioning. The man who had built an entire vision of success and excluded me from it. And yet here he stood, uncertain and for the first time small. "I know you didn't," I said calmly. He swallowed hard. "All this time, we thought you were just following orders." I said, "and leading missions, and building systems your company now depends on." He blinked. "I reviewed your team's access protocol last night," I added, shifting easily into the language of my profession. "There are multiple points of vulnerability, including a framework dependency that could be exploited by adversarial AI. Gregory looked down, the full weight of my earlier questions during the meeting now dawning on him. You outrank everyone on this project," my father said quietly. "Even me." I didn't respond. The truth was evident. "I'm proud of you," he said then, hesitant, as though trying the words for the first time. I looked at him steadily. "You can be, but don't be surprised that I did this without your approval. I stopped waiting for it years ago." There was no malice in my tone, only truth. He nodded slowly. "I see that now." I stepped toward the door, my boots echoing softly against the polished floor. "Colonel," my father said again, as if the title were still foreign in his mouth. I paused. "You were wrong," I said simply. "My family and I have not had many opportunities to discuss the trajectory of my career," I stated with composure. Gregory, no longer able to contain his disbelief, stepped forward sharply. "You're the colonel everyone's been referring to? The one with final authority over the entire project?" "Yes," I affirmed evenly. "I've been serving as the Pentagon liaison for Project Aegis for the past 6 months, following my promotion to full colonel." "6 months," my father echoed, his voice strained and distant. "You've held that rank for half a year, and you didn't tell us." Shannon shifted slightly, recognizing the growing personal tension in the room. "Well, this is quite the surprise," she said, attempting a tactful pivot. "Colonel Williams, given your presence here today, perhaps you'd be willing to brief the broader team directly. It would be a privilege to hear from you in person." I inclined my head appreciatively. "Of course." Stepping to the front of the room, I activated the presentation screen and brought up the classified overview. Project Aegis represents a $1.2 billion strategic investment in cutting-edge cybersecurity infrastructure. My role as liaison is to ensure the integrity, security, and alignment of all systems with Department of Defense requirements. As I presented, I could feel the attention in the room solidify. The executive's expressions gradually shifted from initial curiosity to an unmistakable seriousness and respect. "My office holds final approval on all technical specifications, budgetary distribution, and implementation plans," I continued. "This also extends to personnel assignments in critical positions." Gregory visibly paled at this, undoubtedly recalling his earlier declarations about his team leadership. When I concluded, Shannon offered a succinct endorsement. "As you can see, Colonel Williams brings not only the authority, but also the strategic insight required to ensure this project's success. We are fortunate to have her guidance." A chorus of nods followed, with several executives jotting notes or whispering to one another. My father sat motionless, his expression unreadable. "Furthermore," Shannon added, "Colonel Williams will be conducting evaluations of all division leads over the next 48 hours to assess progress and ensure optimal allocation of resources." Gregory's face turned ashen. Only last night, he had mocked my profession. Today, I would be the one evaluating his performance. As the meeting concluded and the room emptied, Shannon quietly pulled me aside. "Colonel, I had no idea Albert was your father. This must be a proud moment for your family." I offered a diplomatic smile. "It is certainly a meaningful one. They should be incredibly proud. Your work has been exemplary. I've told Albert several times how fortunate we are to have such a capable military partner on this initiative." My father, having approached during the exchange, overheard those words. His face, once confident and commanding, now held something unfamiliar, regret, perhaps, or shame. "Natalie," he began hesitantly, uncertain even how to address me now, "we need to talk." "Certainly," I replied, my tone respectful yet firm. "I have a short meeting with the security operations team. I can meet you in your office at 1100 hours. He nodded, the gesture oddly deferential. It was clear he was unaccustomed to taking scheduling cues from me. As the final attendees filtered out, I heard their murmurs. "Did you know Colonel Williams is Albert's daughter? She's overseeing his entire project. I heard she didn't accept any internal referrals, earned everything on her own." The last voice, Thomas Bailey's, carried across the room. My father froze mid-step, registering the subtext. I had not advanced because of my family name. I had risen in spite of it. At precisely 1100 hours, I arrived at my father's office. Through the frosted glass, I could make out not only him, but my mother and Gregory as well. Evidently, someone had summoned her after the morning's revelations. "Come in," my father called, his voice lacking its usual commanding cadence. I entered, still in uniform, and closed the door behind me. My mother sat on the edge of a guest chair, her expression unreadable, caught somewhere between disbelief and apprehension. Gregory stood rigidly near the window, arms folded. "Please take a seat," my father offered, motioning to a chair across from his desk. "Thank you, but I'll stand," I replied, naturally assuming the at-ease posture, hands clasped behind my back. The silence that followed was weighty. Finally, my father spoke. "Why didn't you tell us?" "You mean, why didn't I tell you that I'd earned something you always believed was impossible?" I said gently but without apology. "You assumed I was wasting my life, that the military was a detour from real ambition." "We didn't know," my mother interjected softly. "You never told us." "I did. I sent invitations to every promotion ceremony. I called when I was deployed. I forwarded the articles once they were cleared for release. You never responded." "But, Colonel," my father said again, clearly still trying to process. "That's roughly equivalent to a vice president," I clarified, allowing the comparison to register. That landed. Both Gregory and my father straightened, understanding the rank in the only context that had ever mattered to them: corporate hierarchy. "And you have the authority to make decisions about our contract?" Gregory asked, incredulous and defensive. "Yes," I answered clearly. "I do." "Is that why you came back now?" my father snapped, his voice brittle. "To blindside us? To humiliate me in front of Shannon?" I stayed calm. "I came back because it's been 5 years. And regardless of everything, you're still my family." I paused for a beat. The contract review just happened to coincide with my visit, though I won't pretend the timing wasn't useful. "Useful," he repeated bitterly. "You walk into my office in full uniform without so much as a heads up. Do you realize what people will assume? That I pulled strings to get my daughter assigned here." I almost laughed at the irony. "Dad, I've gone out of my way to avoid any connection to Pinnacle, precisely to avoid that kind of speculation. General Grant assigned me based on my credentials, my fieldwork, my leadership, and my success in adapting systems for complex, high-risk cyber environments." My mother spoke for the first time. "General Grant, my commanding officer," I explained, "and my mentor. She's filled the role you both chose not to. She supported me, challenged me, and recognized my work. I didn't raise my voice, but the impact was sharp." My mother flinched as if the words had weight. "So that's what this is?" Gregory cut in. "A big reveal. A gotcha moment to show us how wrong we were." "No," I said, steady and clear. "This isn't about retribution. It's about fulfilling my duty to the project and to national security. That you didn't believe in my career is not something I need to carry anymore." My father stood abruptly, anger flashing through the cracks in his composure. "You could have told us," he said, voice tightening. "You let us sit in ignorance, thinking you were some entry-level officer filling out paperwork. Would it have made a difference?" I asked. "When have any of you truly shown interest in what I do? Last night, not a single one of you asked about my work. It was all about Gregory's promotion, Tiffany's condo, Megan's bonus." A heavy silence followed. "We've always wanted the best for you," my mother said, her voice small. "No," I corrected gently. "You wanted what you believed was best for me. And when I chose something else, something you didn't understand, you decided it was beneath me." My father sat back down, his posture slumped. "Gregory stayed the course. He's done well. And I'm glad for him," I said sincerely. "But that was never my path. I needed something that challenged me differently." Gregory finally turned from the window, his arms no longer crossed. "All this time, we thought you were just stuck. Just spinning your wheels." "I know," I said quietly. "And you never hid how disappointed you were. Last night, Greg, you told me I'd never be anything in the military." He looked down. "I didn't know. You didn't ask." My mother stood abruptly, clearly uncomfortable with the vulnerability. "Well, now we do know. And we're very proud," she said quickly. "I've always told your father the military is a respectable career." I almost smiled. The rewrite of history was so familiar, so automatic. "Mom," I said softly, "please don't pretend now. That kind of revision doesn't help. If we're going to move forward, it has to be real." She opened her mouth to reply, then closed it again, caught off guard. "Natalie," my father said at last, using my name instead of deflecting with rank. "What do you want from us now? Recognition? An apology?" "I want what I've always wanted," I said. "Respect. For my choices. For my work. For me. That's it." The room went still. After a long moment, my father rose again. This time he approached me, not with bluster or scorn, but with humility. He extended his hand. "Colonel Williams," he said, his voice thick, "I owe you a serious apology. I didn't see what you'd become. I didn't try to see. And I was wrong. It was stiff, formal, deeply him, but genuine." I took his hand. "Thank you, Dad. I still don't understand half of what you do," he admitted. "But I'd like to. If you're willing to explain." Something in my chest softened. "I'd like that." My mother followed, less comfortable, her voice strained. "We should have come to one of your ceremonies. I didn't realize how important they were." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the closest she'd ever come to one. I gave a small nod. It would have meant a lot, but you can be there for the next one. Gregory still hovered by the window, arms now loose at his sides. So, he said, cracking a weak smile, you outrank me. By a lot. This isn't a competition, Greg. He sighed. It's always been one. That's how they set us up. I just had the advantage of playing the part they expected. I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the rivalry. We took different roads. Both have their own value. He nodded, slower this time. What I saw in that room today, I couldn't do what you do. Not the strategy. Not the leadership. That was impressive. From Gregory, that was practically a standing ovation. Thanks, I said softly. My father cleared his throat. Shannon wants to have dinner with us tonight. All of us. She was more than impressed. I know, I said softly, allowing a small smile to form. Of course you know, my father replied, shaking his head with something I hadn't seen in a long time respect. You probably understand more about this company now than I ever did. Just the classified sections, I replied dryly. He laughed, a real one. Possibly the first we had shared in years. Something had shifted in the room. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was lighter, tentative, but filled with possibility. There was still distance between us, history that couldn't be rewritten. But in that moment, I finally felt seen. I've got another meeting to get to, I said, checking my watch. But I'd be glad to join you for dinner tonight with Shannon. As I reached for the door, my mother's voice caught me. Natalie, She trailed off, the words struggling to find form. I know, Mom, I said gently, one step at a time. Then I left them, closing the door behind me on the version of me they had clung to, and walking into the life I had built on my own terms. They knew now. Their daughter, once dismissed and overlooked, was Colonel Natalie Williams. And every ounce of the respect I carried had been earned, not given. 6 months later, I welcomed them into my D.C. condo for dinner. The apartment was modern, with panoramic views of the Potomac and a quiet efficiency shaped by military order. It wasn't just a home, it was a symbol of the life I had claimed. We were still learning how to be a family again, but the difference was clear. My father was the first to arrive, holding a framed newspaper clipping about the Project Aegis launch. My photo stood at the center, flanked by General Grant and Shannon Murphy. I thought you might want a copy, he said with quiet pride. I've got one in my office. I ran a hand over the frame, my throat tightening. Thank you. That means a lot. My mother followed, pie dish in hand. Apple, she said, smiling. Still your favorite. It wasn't perfect, this attempt at reconnection. But it was real. She complimented the apartment, asked real questions, laughed at a joke about military neatness without turning it into a dig. Progress. Gregory and Megan arrived next, armed with wine and a surprising dose of humility. So, he said, settling in, those protocols you mentioned? I implemented them. My team thought I'd invented the wheel. I gave him a look. You gave proper credit, I hope? Eventually, he said with a grin. After enjoying the applause for about 5 minutes. I nodded. Good call. It worked, though. Well done. That kind of professional respect, peer-to-peer, meant more to him now than brotherly approval ever had. My father wandered to the bookshelf, eyeing my modest collection of medals and citations. I read about that cyber attack you helped stop last year, he said quietly. Didn't understand half of it, but sounded serious. It was, I replied. We got ahead of it just in time. Could lives have been lost? Easily. These systems protect everything from hospitals to power grids. He nodded, slower this time. I used to think service meant boots on the ground. Never imagined this kind of battlefield. Most people don't, I said. That's the point. The doorbell rang. I opened it to find General Eleanor Grant, in off-duty dress, but every inch the leader she always was. Colonel, she greeted with a smile. General, thank you for coming. I had invited her not just because she was in town, but because my family needed to meet the person who had seen my worth when they hadn't. Everyone, I announced as we stepped into the room. This is Brigadier General Eleanor Grant, my mentor and commanding officer. My father stood at once, offering his hand. General, it's an honor. I understand we owe you a great deal. Eleanor shook his hand firmly. Natalie earned everything on her own. I just helped clear the runway. My mother offered her a seat and began setting the table. The awkwardness that once filled every gathering was replaced by something unfamiliar ease. Over dinner, Eleanor shared stories about base life and training exercises, carefully omitting any classified details. Natalie developed a training protocol that reduced breach attempts by over 60%, she noted. It's now a standard across multiple defense branches. I watched as my parents processed this. Really processed it. We didn't know, my mother said softly. We never understood what you were really doing. No, I agreed without malice. You didn't. But now you do. After dinner, Gregory and I cleared the dishes. I used to think I was ahead, he said quietly. New titles, raises, corner office. But watching you in that room, I couldn't do what you do. Not a chance. It was never about competition, Greg. I know that now, he said. I'm sorry it took me so long to get it. I looked at him and saw, maybe for the first time in years, not a rival, but a brother. Later, over dessert, my father raised his glass. To Colonel Natalie Williams, he said, voice clear with emotion. For choosing a different path and showing us all just how far it could lead. We didn't see it before, but we do now. And we're proud. We clinked glasses, and I felt something shift deep inside, something old finally letting go. I didn't need their approval anymore, but receiving it, freely given, still meant something. This was never about proving them wrong. It was always about proving myself right. Becoming who I was meant to be, regardless of who noticed, or when. Your turn. Has someone ever dismissed your ambitions? Have you had to prove your worth the hard way? Share your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, tap like, subscribe, and pass it on to someone who needs to hear. Backhand index pointing right, your journey matters, even when others don't understand it. Keep going. The respect will come. But your purpose, that's already real.